Obedience. We hear it all the time, in particular when we're dealing with children. But obedience is a word that speaks more to the heart of someone who's struggling with moving forward than it does to the individual who's always done what they were supposed to do. I was one of those individuals who did it right all the time. But in my heart, it wasn't about me doing it right. It was about me doing right by God. Am I listening to that still small voice? Am I allowing myself to move in the direction that God wants me to move in? I know I'm not the only one who has dealt with the issue of obedience. And so we continue our talk with Kina Hutchins Clements, who in an act of obedience got up from her place of complacency and started to move, literally and figuratively. And as she was moving, God was able to show her some things that were happening to her physically that could have caused her to stand still for the rest of her life, even cause her to be still permanently. But that's not God's plan for us. God's plan is not to take us away from what he has for us. God's plan is to bring us into a place of obedience where he can take us even further. And so at this time, I want to welcome back to Surviving Change my guest, Kina Hutchins Clements.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, so when we left off, Kina, you had shared with the audience how you, in an act of obedience, you got out of your bed, literally, and you started to make some changes in your physical body. You lost weight. The doctor said, told you you're going to have a stroke, that you were at the level of having a stroke. You had high cholesterol, your blood pressure was high, and so you do the almost impossible to someone like me, but through your story, I know it can happen. You go from 240 pounds to 120 pounds, and you should be in the best shape of your life. You're coaching others, you're training others, and then the one thing that allows you to have the capacity to run and walk on the treadmill and climb mountains goes out on you when your lung collapses, not once, but twice. And so in our last conversation, we get to the point where you're sent to a hospital that specializes and is able to treat you. And they come back with the news that something has traumatized your body to the point that you have a hole in your diaphragm. Your liver, which looks like might be cancerous, it's not cancerous, but as a result of this hole in your diaphragm, your liver has now moved inside of this hole. Clearly, that's not natural.
No.
And it is what's causing your lung to collapse. And so now we're preparing for surgery and also for the idea that you may have another condition. So if you pick up where we left off with your story.
Well, we were getting ready to go into surgery, and I think my doctor at the time had a waiting list, and she wanted to send me home. And so she sent me home, and I got back home, but I still wasn't feeling well. So my insurance company called me on the phone, and they said, we just paid for this surgery. It's a $500,000 surgery. They were using special technology. Actually, it was going to be a robotic arm that would go into my side that would do the surgery. And they were going to have different TVs in the room where they can see it, which is a pleurodesis, is where they were going to go in and repair the lung at. A special surgery where they were going to use chemicals to spray inside of my body that was going to stick the lung to the chest wall for forever, where it wouldn't move anymore.
So we have surgical glue stick.
Yes.
So that your lung will not go anywhere. So you got to super glue your lung back with the fancy name of what again?
The pleurodesis.
Pleurodesis, okay? So anyone out there who needs to know that, you know, your days of gluing things down on paper is not in vain. There are doctors out there who are pleurodesing lungs and everything to people's bodies. All right, so go ahead.
So they were going to do the pleurodesis, and they were going to put a mesh over my diaphragm. But the doctor at the time had a waiting list, and she felt like I was an emergency call for her. But for me, I was an emergency call. I had 2 small kids. And the nurse called me. This was my first time ever hearing a nurse call me. And she called me. She said, "You still don't sound well to me on the phone. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to go find somebody to come pick you up and take you back to the hospital. Because technically, you're not even supposed to be out of the hospital and at home. So I called, and I got someone to take me back to the hospital. And when I got there, she was still on call, and she said, no, I want to send her home. She said, I want to send her back home. And my insurance company fought with her over the phone. No, we're not sending her home.
It's the first time for everything, because normally people are fighting the insurance company to get treatment, but the insurance company's like, we made an investment, we need a return on our investment, so we need you to do this surgery now. Okay, so did the doctor end up surrendering to?
Well, at the time, I didn't know what to do. I had gotten back upstairs into my normal room, and my nurses was, they really didn't tell me what to do. So my cousin, that is a nurse, I called her. So she said, call the hospital director. So I called him, and he got another doctor up there. And when the doctor came in, he was almost 85. I said, you got to be kidding me. Like, you give me a doctor that didn't want to do the surgery, and now you give me a doctor that's 85 years old. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Like, who's dying here? Is it going to be me or the doctor? Okay.
So he walks in, and he came in, he had an earring in his ear, and he said, you know what, young lady, when do you want to have the surgery? And I said, whenever you can. And he was like, how about tomorrow? How about 7:30 tomorrow? He's like, wait, before I make any promises, let me make sure I have a OR available for you to have the surgery. So he walked out of the room, he came back in, and he said, well, 7:30 it is. I'll see you bright and early. So that evening, they didn't tell me what they were getting ready to do. They were going to insert another tube in my side. For me, that was anxiety, because those tubes hurt.
Okay.
So when I got downstairs, I just thought I was going for some more labs. And I got down there, and it was 20 people in the room. And you have the radiologists. They were in the room. I had a gynecologist in the room, and I maybe had a couple of nurses and students in there. And they said, well, now we're going to plot to see where we're going to put the tube in. Because by then, I was at my fourth chest tube at that time. So they were going to go ahead and plot it out. So they plotted out. And to me, it was amazing to see the process. But I still hadn't processed it. But it was amazing to see the process. So they plotted it out. They went in. They put me in the MRI machine. They kind of pulled me back out a little bit. They placed the tube back where it was supposed to be at. And they were preparing me for surgery the next morning. So comes the next morning at 4 a.m., my nurse come in, and she said, well, actually, I hadn't seen this nurse since I first entered the hospital. Okay. The same nurse that prayed with me the night before. Okay. And I was still shaking like a leaf. I was shaking. And so she said, you know what? You know God got you, right? You have one of the best doctors in Piedmont, Atlanta. And I said, then it kind of gave me a little comfort at that moment. But I still was very, very nervous. And she got ready to push me down the hallway. And I think she sat me in the hallway for a minute. And that's when I started praying. I started calling on all my ancestors, my great-grandmothers. I said, look, you're going to get me through this, because I'm going to come back home to those boys no matter what it is. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to win. And I was like, God, you didn't pull me in this moment to take my life away. You said there was something bigger for me. And I think at that time, a little bit of anger set in, because I said, you plan something bigger and you're just going to take me away like this from my kids. And so God said, I told you to be patient with me. Be patient with me. So they pushed me down into the pre-op room, and I think I sat there a minute, and I started seeing everybody else leaving back for the OR. And then all of a sudden, maybe an hour later, over 30-something people started walking my way, like a team of people. with the anesthesiologist. And so by then my nerves set in and I had to go to the bathroom. I was like, look, I got to go to the bathroom again. And he was like, no, we'll take care of that. You'll be okay. He was like, it is a great day for surgery. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, it's a great day for you, but not for me. And so at that moment, they started inserting I think an IV in my neck. They started inserting the IV in my neck. They inserted one in my foot, and I had double IVs in both arms. And I was like talking to him, and I was like, I'm so nervous. And next thing I know, I was out. And I ended up waking up, and I was coughing. And I couldn't see anybody. I couldn't see anything. And I was just coughing, and the nurses were beating me on my back. Miss Clements, come out of it. Miss Clements, come out of it. But I still couldn't see anybody at the moment. And so instantly, it felt like God restored my breath. Mm-hmm. I instantly said, and my eyes popped open. Mm-hmm. And I sat in recovery, and they sent my mom in once again to give me the news that I was going to have to go to the ICU. They were like, forever long, you need to be in the ICU. But through the grace of God, I only stayed there a night. The next morning, I was hungry. I was ready to eat. And they were like, no, you can't eat right now. You have a lot of air in your stomach. And I'm like, air? And so they came in and they stuck a tube down my nose to try to suck the air out of my stomach so I can eat. And I was still in severe pain. They were supposed to go in my side with robotic arms. But what the doctor realized was he couldn't get in that space because I was so tiny at top. So he had to break my ribs to get in that space. Which I was on morphine at the time, and it still was not even hitting the pain. He came to me in the ICU, and he said, you know what? He said, normal time I would have been stumped going into surgery, and I couldn't figure out the problem or the problem solution to fix this. Mm-hmm. And he said it was just like God took over my hands and just started guiding me through, and I was able to come up with another solution to repair the lung. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me and he said, you're some kind of superwoman. He said, if you don't believe in God, you believe in God now.
What I like about that is, even in your trial, you weren't necessarily attempting to testify. There was something, when you talk about God's divine will, this was not just about you. You understand?
Yes.
This was not just about you. This was about this 85-year-old crypt keeper that when you see this guy coming in and you're thinking, how they gonna send me this old man to take care of young me? Mm-hmm. But there was something that God was doing in his life. There was something that God used that nurse to do for your life. And if anyone does not believe in the prayers of the righteous, I hope you believe now. Because this nurse who stepped outside of her profession and chose to minister to Kina is the prayer of the righteous that brought that doctor there so that he could get the insight to know that after your years of surgery, after your years of practice, I'm still going to show you how to do something you hadn't even done before. So you get out of surgery and you're in recovery, and the doctor is telling you, hey, if you don't believe in God, come on, let's say the salvation prayer, whatever he was saying to you. He definitely believed in God at that point. And so now you're going through the phase of recovery. We want to go ahead and just kind of press forward so that we can get to the point where you get this diagnosis of endometriosis, and now what do we do to get Kina back to where Kina was?
Well, I think I'm going to start a little bit because this is where the turning point for me started happening. After they went in to do the surgery, they put me in, I guess they went and did another MRI to see whether or not everything was still in place. And I was standing in the hallway and I was waiting, and this guy appeared out of nowhere. I don't know where he came from. He had dark hair. Mm-hmm. And he walked up to me and he said, I'm glad you're feeling better. I was in the room with you this whole entire time. And I kind of looked at him and he looked at me. and he smiled and he just disappeared. I didn't see him. I didn't see where he went. And so I went upstairs and I went in the room and I said, do y'all have anybody on your surgical team with dark hair, very handsome? She was like, I've been working here for years in the OR. I've never seen anybody like that. She said, just call that your guardian angel. And at that moment, that changed my life.
Okay.
To know that God had had his hand on me that whole entire time, and that he sent somebody to me to reassure me
that he was with you.
That he was with me this whole entire time, that he never left me. And I think at that point, after all that happened, I found out about the endometriosis. It wasn't a severe case at the moment. They didn't see it in my lungs. I got back home, got back to being normal. And I think January 1st, I went back to work after a month. That's not normal to go back to work after a month. Usually people in my condition would take a year to recover.
Wow.
And I think my surgery was actually the first part of November. I went back to work January the 1st. And it's because I missed the kids at school. I was a Christian school teacher at the moment. And I just missed my kids and I wanted to go back to them. They had substitute teachers and, you know, I had my ones that would cry. And they were used to me not being present, you know, they would cry. And so I was just so concerned about them. I never even thought about myself. And I think it went to maybe 2 months later working, my supervisor called me and she said, I want you to come to my office and I want you to talk to me for a minute. And I had already started having a little problems, frustrations at work, because for me, it was great to be alive. When I had people that were sitting in the room with me that was complaining about small things in life, for me, I'm just like, don't you see the air that we're breathing? Don't you see us just being here? And I think at times I got a little frustrated and it may have came off as anger. And so she talked to me and she said, you know, people that had major trauma issues have to go to counseling. Have you ever thought about going to Christian counseling? And, you know, being me, I was like, no, I'm not going to Christian counseling. Like, I can't do Christian counseling. She was like, I need you to go to Christian counseling. I need you to go to this specific counselor that I'm going to send you to. It's going to be one that's going to help you do that process of you near death process. And I think that was at the time that it started changing me, to help me bring everything in perspective in my life and where God was calling me to be. And that's when I started thinking about the personal training.
Okay.
Helping people like me to get back to the normal them, so it can keep them from any kind of ailments or any kind of disease, to stop the process before we get to where I was. And I started doing a little bit of personal training at that time, and then I was asked to make an appearance on a radio station for Faith and Fit Thursdays. Actually, I had some other people ahead of me that was doing the show, but then I think it was Deborah, Waka Flocka's mom, was inspired by my story, and she said, I want you to come on every Thursday. And so I started coming on every Thursday, and every time I told the story, somebody was convicted to follow God. And it was at that moment I knew what God was calling me to do. At that moment, I knew what God was calling me to do. It was bigger than me. And at times it frightened me. And even when I got to LaGrange, my teacher, my Christian teacher told me, he said, look, I had a dream about you last night, that something big is going to happen in your life. You're going to bring a lot of people to God with your story. And I said, how can I, bring everybody to God? But I actually was the oldest in my class. I think I was 35. No, I was 34 at the time when I was at LaGrange, and the rest of the kids were 18. And we had to get up in front of class and we had to tell a personal story to us. And so I told the story. And a lot of kids said, you know what? I just want to follow God right now. Like, this is a miracle to see somebody standing in front of us talking and breathing that's been through that much trauma in their life. And I think at the time I just started, each person that I meet, I just start telling the story to them. And they just started feeling convicted to follow God. I've even been in the gym working out, doing my personal time, working out, and trainers go get other clients that they have and bring them to the treadmill and be like, look, if she did it, you can do it. And I was on the treadmill, actually, I think that was a month ago. And this lady was on the treadmill, she was trying to lose weight, and she came to me and she said, one of the trainers kind of referred you to me. And she said to look at what you're doing. She said to look at what you're doing. It tells me that God is real. To run the way you do, God has to be real doing this. And she just fell to her knees and she started crying. She said, I know I can do this if you're up here doing this. So I know where in my life I want to be. A lot of people think that you should charge people. I don't even charge people to do personal training because that's not what God called me to do. He didn't call me to make a profit off of it. He called me to bring the people unto him. And a lot of people think I'm crazy. Like, you're not charging people?
Yeah, I'm trying to process, whether you need to go back to the therapist. I know that when I attempted to have a trainer, like, I was paying some money and I was only getting the physical. But what you're giving your clients is priceless. You're giving them life beyond the physical. You're giving an opportunity to see Christ. And you can't really charge for that because it was free. It was free to you. It came at a price, but it was free to you. So now that you're in your new life, your improved life, what could you, beyond what you've already shared with everyone, I don't know if anyone still needs to know something, just in case somebody still need to know, okay, that they can go through anything that life presents them and come out victorious. There's a scripture that says we are more than conquerors. We don't just win. Like, we win with swag. We win like over the top win. So what could you share for that person that's still a little iffy about the changes that they're going through, the trauma that they might be facing, the crisis that they feel is so overwhelming?
That God is very merciful. There were things that I did in my teenage years, in my early adult years. In my mind, I thought, wow, I'm a sinner. I can't move past this. But to see the way that God covered my life and still allowed me to have grace, that changed me. So if you're in that position where you feel like there's no hope, always know that God gives grace. There is grace. Despite of what you're in, you have grace. You're a fighter. You can win. And everyone is on this earth for a purpose. You may not see the purpose now, but there is a purpose for you. You may be that person for someone else. So even through my story, it shocks me that I'm even at this stage where I'm that for somebody else, because it was a point of time where I was in your position or their position, being nervous, being afraid, being very fearful. But I overcame that. And through my own story and telling my own testimony, it healed me inside and out. I'm healed. I don't even claim it anymore, because I know God has healed my spirit and my mind.
That's to be whole. And as we wrap up this segment, and I'm amazed, not so much at your story. I'm amazed that when we yield to the experiences, not give in per se, but yield, just take a moment, to just kind of like brace ourselves, that what comes out of those moments is so enlightening, that we cannot even really put into words. And I thank you that you were able to put it into words, but the awesomeness, as you revealed, of God's grace and his mercy to minister to us, to build us up, to keep us going, to allow us to get through things. And then the other thing that you spoke about was his presence. Mm-hmm. That his presence was not only physically there for you to remind you, but his presence is always there. Mm-hmm. So just in 30 seconds or less, is there a way that people can find out more about you as far as life coaching and, physical training that you want to share?
Actually, I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook. On Facebook, I'm Kina Hutchins Clements on Facebook. On Instagram, I'm Kina Fit Fantastic on Instagram. And I have a Christian blog on there as well, which is Kina Deshawn 18. Okay. And that's when I started doing the Christian blogging. So you can find me on there. It's more of gearing to mentorship for our younger generation, to bring them over into our grace and mercy.
Okay.
So that's where you can find me at, or you can find me on YouTube. I'm getting my YouTube page up. I'm moving a little slow doing it, but I am going to have exercise videos out and actually more information on how to start the process of losing weight. So.
Okay. Well, Surviving Change family, and thank you so much, Kina Hutchins Clements. Let me tell you something. The Bible alludes to things coming, and there's so many different parables. I mean, right now, I just want you to know, if you didn't know, this is my former cheerleader, okay? And what we can learn from anyone's experience, but to learn from the young. I know that I was that individual that was just thought that I could have a story to tell everybody. But I am blessed to know that from a former student, from a young lady, that as I enter into the better half of my life, I'm not going to say that I'm getting old, that I'm learning the lessons of being a survivor, of being more than a conqueror, of God's grace and mercy, and that through obedience we can experience above and beyond what we can even begin to ask for, what we can even begin to think. So if you want to experience that, just get still. Take some time. Reflect on all that you've gone through and recognize that there is absolutely nothing that you cannot survive if you're willing to embrace the change. Until the next time, I'm your host, Angela Addison. Thank you so much for joining me and my guest, Kina Hutchins Clements. And remember, if there's any change that you go through, you can change and you can survive that change. Thank you again.